Success! I have started the video. Okie dokie. And now I'm presenting. Look at that. Okay, so my name is Jesse Hunt, and I am going to be presenting a quick 15 to 20 video series on an introduction to Linux and the web. This is episode 1. Expect them all to be about like 15 to 30 minutes, an hour if I just lose my mind, which is totally possible. So, let's see. What's required of you? So, I need you to watch these videos. If you watch these videos and you have, like, I don't know, a document in Google Drive or Dropbox or maybe a pen and paper that is attached to your freaking body that you can just always have on you, that would be wonderful. This will help you to take notes, and then those notes will be valuable to you for a year or two if you get into this industry. Trust me when I say that even if you think you know something really well right now, if it's not in practice, it's not going to get used. And if it's not going to get used, then sure enough, you will forget it, and then you will interview, and you will be sad. Always take notes. Put those notes into a document somewhere. Even if you never ever use them, I swear you will not regret it, because one day someone will ask you, how do you do the Linux thing? And you'll be like, if only I had written it down and Jesse told me about it. And of course she deleted the video afterwards. Okay, I'm never going to do that, but maybe I do. Maybe I get embarrassed of these one day. I highly doubt it. No one's going to watch these. Anyway, so if you want to take notes, that would be wonderful. Another great thing to do is to be practicing what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So to do that, there are a couple different things you can do. Depending on if you're in Windows, Linux, Mac, it changes. This class is made for the ultimate beginner. I don't care if you've never used Linux before. I don't care if you just have an ancient Windows 98 just archaic computer. I'm kidding. I'm so sorry for anyone like that remembers Windows 98. Anyway, the point is, no matter what system you're on, we can get you up and running with Linux these days. It's not a problem. But you do need some programs. If you're on Windows, you need to download Putty. If you are on a modern version of Windows, say Windows 7 to Windows 10, you can download Commander. Commander is pretty sweet. I like that way more than Putty, but Putty's super trusted and super well used. So we will go over where to download all of these things after the video, but I'm just talking about them now. So, if you are already on Linux, you got a Raspberry Pi for your birthday, and you done downloaded your cool little SD card full of fancy Linux, the thing you need to do with that is open up a terminal. Possibly it's called console. Possibly it's console spelled with a K. Possibly it's console, but it's just spelled all weird. You can find it. If you right-click anywhere on your Linux desktop, you should be able to get to a terminal. If for some reason you can't, if you're already in a just plain CLI, which stands for command line interface, if you're already in the command line interface, you are like 12 steps away from like being a Linux admin. It's crazy. So that is fantastic. Mac peoples. So by default, there is a program installed on all Macs called Terminal. You can use that to open it up and play with any of the commands you want. Fun fact, Macs are Unix-based. Linux is Unix-based. So most of the commands we talk about here also work in Linux. It's fantastic. As well as iOS and actually I don't know if they work in iOS, but I know for sure they work in OS X, at least in El Capitan and Yosemite. I've not had any problems. It's been wonderful. The other fun thing to download if you want to really nerd out and be like the cool developers in Starbucks with their fancy stickered MacBooks, you can download iTerm 2. It's pretty sweet. It's got a little bit more customizability. Lets you do things like you split your terminals and have transparency and cool stuff, like the cool kids, I totally recommend it. That's it as far as those programs go. This is not going to be a GUI-centric class. It's going to be entirely command line. We will touch very, very barely on GUIs, but generally just applications that allow you to connect to Linux. So in general, we're going to be opening up a terminal, we're going to be opening up an SSH application, or we're going to be opening up a terminal to SSH into something. It's wonderful. So do keep in mind, as long as you have those things open, you should be set. The other thing is read my website, howtonix.info. It is very sparse right now, and that is just the saddest thing in the world, but in time I will put more and more resources up there. For instance, all the different things you can download for your terminal will be up there, as well as fantastic sites that I have used over time, as well as other people have recommended to me to learn Linux faster. This stuff does not take any college or really that much effort. It just takes like a few hours a day, every day for the rest of your life, and then maybe you can get that crappy tech support job where they overwork you and your life is terrible. I'm kidding. I mean, there's a possibility you get that, and there's a high possibility that you have to work that at some point in your life. But hey, building blocks to working on the back end of the internet. Isn't that cool? Practice. That's another thing. I already kind of went over that with practice as I'm going along, but do it outside of what I'm talking about. Just spend like an hour or two every day. Type in your terminal. Mess around with it. If you have any questions at all, leave a comment on this YouTube video, and I would be happy to answer them. I think that's about it as far as what's required of you. The only other thing I would say is, again, I know I already said this, but if you have questions, leave them in the YouTube comments, and I swear I will get back to you. It's not good to just leave them unanswered. Another thing you can do is you can always just type your exact question into Google, and chances are somebody has already asked it. Okay. So, what qualifies me to teach you? Alright, this is kind of funny because the answer is really not much. But the fun answer is I took a course in Unix Linux fundamentals once at a college. It was a real college, credited. It was technically a community college, and it was in Michigan, and no one really knows about it. It's called Washtenaw Community College. I had a really sweet teacher. He was really awesome. But that's really all I did, and I didn't do that until I had already started in the Linux field. Funny enough, but it still counts. It means that I've gotten formal education in this stuff. What really qualifies me is the real-world experience. So one of the things is I've worked as a Linux support technician. I have worked as a Unix Linux support engineer, a Linux operations analyst, an information security analyst specialized in Unix, and I am currently a Linux system administrator at Analog Devices Incorporated. I spent some time at Apple. I've worked at Nexus.net, which was a hosting company, as well as I have worked at some other random companies you've never really heard of, so we're not gonna talk about them too much. But you know what? The first few companies maybe mean something to you. So been doing this for like 3 to 4 years around that, depending on what you count as Unix Linux support, because I've been at all different layers of things. Sometimes I've been deep diving into sort of like low-level kernel things and looking at like doing just ridiculous things with memory. Sometimes I've been doing things entirely in user space. And every now and then I'm just doing like help desk stuff, like, man, your keyboard's worked, let me fix that. But for the most part, I am regularly in a terminal every single day. I'm always SSH into something, and I am doing probably coding, maybe setting up something else. I run a lot of commands in Linux, so I think that qualifies me to teach a really newbie class. I also regularly go to LinuxCon and DEF CON. I haven't been to LinuxCon in like a year, 2 years now, but I went to DEF CON last year. I'm going to be at DEF CON this year. I'm also probably going to go to PyCon, and I go to other conventions, but they're not really tech related. So those are cool tech conventions to learn more about stuff. DEF CON's more of a security thing. LinuxCon is more of a what's the latest in Linux. Also, it's probably the year of the Linux desktop. You don't get that joke yet, but it's gonna be hilarious to you one day. Okay, I'm also just an avid Linux enthusiast. I use this stuff even when I'm at home. I run my own web server. I make sure that it's updated. I check out the latest OSs. I really care so much. It is just amazing that I have friends. If you don't want to listen to me, that's totally fine. There are plenty of people out there with computer science degrees that don't ramble nearly as much as me, that are probably more fun to listen to, and that's cool. Okay, so why Linux? So enough about me and enough about why this series and more about why Linux. I'm going to be totally honest with you, I never get into anything technical really in this particular video. We go into a mild history after this, but we don't get into start like technically things until next video. This video is just to weed out the 2 of 3 people that were listening and get it down to 1. Wonderful. All right, so why Linux? You can develop and operate applications for the internet. The internet's pretty cool, right, guys? I have loved the internet for quite some time. A short little story. The whole thing that got me into this was that I love video games. And video games don't always run on Linux, but they do attract huge crowds of people that want to go and LAN. And that's when you take your computer and you put it next to somebody else's computer, and you all hook up Ethernet cables to the same location, and you eat freaking Doritos and drink Mountain Dew and balls until you vomit, and you just keep playing shooters all night long. It's wonderful. A lot of those people, their day jobs happen to be working on the internet or doing some sort of other information technology sort of support thing during the day. The way I got into this was I went to QuakeCon and it was pretty sweet. And then after that, I hung out on Reddit with some people and they were like, hey, why don't you learn Linux? Working at a sandwich shop sure sucks. And I was like, whoa, how did you know? Working at a sandwich shop does suck. The moral of this story is that Reddit is wonderful, video games are wonderful, and if you want to work on either of those things, you should learn Linux because neither of them are very far apart. So Reddit runs on Linux, Google runs on Linux, Facebook runs on Linux. Most applications you use, if they have a website, it probably runs on Linux. There's a small portion of the internet that runs on either Unix-based things or in some other fun cases, it could be Windows, but not very much of it is Windows. Most of the Windows stuff happens to be more for like the gaming side of things. They'll have a bunch of Windows servers, but even gaming has got a good portion of Linux servers in there. So if you learn Linux, there's always a job for you for at least the next 20 to 30 years till we automate you away. All right. So Linux runs on any hardware, mostly. When I say any hardware, I mean so Unix was developed in like 1969, and then Linux was developed in like 1991, 92, around there. Pretty close to my birth year, funny enough. It'll run on nearly any hardware. Hardware as old as me, that's for sure. And I don't know how old I sound, but that's definitely older than like 10, and that's cool. For the most part, if you can dig up a computer somewhere in your house, you could probably install Linux on it. And that makes it super accessible. I'm sure you've heard of the Raspberry Pis, the $20, $25 computers that they ship out to just everyone and their grandmother and everyone's local homeless person, just anybody who wants one. They can give them to that or that person. Sorry, that sounds terrible. They can give that to anyone. They get shipped out to a lot of schools, a lot of poorer areas that couldn't otherwise afford computers, and they freaking run Linux, and it's wonderful because Linux is so accessible. So it running on basically any hardware is fantastic. Linux is also free. So it doesn't cost any money. You'll notice that Windows costs money sometimes, most of the time, depending on whether they're doing a developer release or not. And then Macs. Macs also, the operating system doesn't cost any money, but boy does the hardware cost a lot of money, and you're not getting the operating system without the hardware money. So the fact that Linux is free is pretty sweet. It means you can install it anywhere. You could probably break your Mac and put it on there. I wouldn't recommend it. I would much more say you should steal someone's smart blender or something like that. Hack Linux on that. A lot of the Internet of Things runs on Linux. So you'll notice that like you might have like a smart fridge or something at home. Um, if you can find a port somewhere on it, or if you can just connect to it via Wi-Fi or something like that, or whatever it's using, NFC, I don't know. I'm sure you can find out that it's probably running Linux. Most of the Internet of Things, including a lot of the smart TVs and stuff like that, will be running Linux. Don't quote me on that being totally true. I did try to put in the most disclaimer, but the point is that it's seriously just freaking everywhere. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a sec, but just knowing that it's everywhere around you means a lot. It also scales to accommodate millions of users. Reddit doesn't actually have like 5 users. Funny enough, it's more than just me and those couple people I told you about. It's actually tons of people, like millions. And there's also tons of people that use Google. Um, Once upon a time, I did a Google interview, and I joked with my networking engineer interviewer that he was asking me how traceroute works, and I was just like, okay, and then yada yada, and then when you connect to Google.com server, you know, the one server, because it all runs on one server, and the joke there is that there's no way in all of the world that could happen. It's just not possible. Google is amazing, but not even they can get it all to run on one piece of hardware. So the good thing though is that you can put Linux on lots of machines and then combine them all together in what's called a cluster, and it will scale. You can have many, 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 many instances of Linux, and they will all work together in somewhat perfect harmony, kind of. It's all free, you get what you pay for. Um, there's lots of paid applications that run on Linux, but you have to realize that a lot of these people are doing this in the garage, so mileage may vary. It's still really cool though, because if you have the patience and you can steal someone's smart blender, you can go to town. Lots of fun. The other thing is the open source revolution. So I said that Linux was free, and I totally meant it. The reason it's free is because it is open source. This means that all of the code behind Linux you can just go look at. There's totally files with all of it in it, and if you wanted to, you could make your own Linux. There's nothing that stops you from doing that. Linux is the first successful open source operating system. It encourages forking and merging of projects, and forking is when you take a copy of somebody's code and then you say, I now declare this mostly mine, and they're like, yeah, sure, whatever, I licensed it so you can do that. And then you rename it as you begin to change and change and change and change the code base. And once you have changed and changed and changed the code base, then you eventually end up with basically your own product, but it has your name on it. It also, when I say merging, I mean then at some point, the dude who wrote the original code is just like, whoa, dude, you're actually doing some pretty sweet stuff. It's crazy that I've been on vacation for 6 months. How about you just bring all those changes back over here? And that other guy's just like, yeah, really, I was really hoping you'd come back from vacation. I didn't want to maintain this forever anyway. Let's just put this all together and then let's both go on vacation. And you can both do that. You can put all of your code together and then make a new thing. Or you can just say, hey, you've got a bug in your code and you can go fix it. With a lot of other applications, like if Windows had a bug in their code and you were like, hey, I fixed this bug in your code, they'd be like, how the heck did you get our source code? That is not okay. And they'd be upset with you. Maybe. Probably not. But I guess the point is that Linux encourages this sort of things. these sort of things, sorry, and it is wonderful. So much so that it's supported by the community, and you're going to have tons of fantastic websites out there. To name a couple, linuxquestions.org, stackoverflow.com. Um, Seriously, all of GitHub is just filled with not only people putting open source code out there, a lot of it running almost exclusively on Linux, but then people opening what are called issues, asking questions, and people explaining it. There are also tons of forums out there. There's tons of other web series out there that aren't me that are going on about this. So there is tons of support out there. If you need help, there is someone out there that will help you. The Linux developers and people who mess with it and stuff like that, you can find them at conventions. You can ask them questions. If it's not a stupid question that you couldn't Google in 2 minutes, they'll probably sit down and explain it to you. It's a really nice community. There are a few exceptions, but it's otherwise a labor of love, and that is just wonderful. So, one more thing. So the huge reason that got me into it is I told you about the sandwich thing. Yeah, so I was making sandwiches for a living. That kind of sucks. I was studying to be an artist, and then although I still love art and I still make art and I think it's fantastic, that was not going to put bread on the table whatsoever. It actually wasn't going to put anything on the table. It was only going to put my sadness and failed art on the table. And although you technically can eat that, eventually it would probably kill me and poison me. So because that is a sad way to go out, my friends said, why not just learn Linux? And I was like, oh, why don't I just do that? That's the thing. I'll just do that instead. So I dropped out of college. I was in the middle of an art degree, and I started learning this stuff. And now I have so many opportunities in front of me. In the beginning, it was just tech support, but then it became like administration, and I got to wear a fancy hat and like carry a big band hammer. That was pretty cool. And then I'm doing all this engineering, and I'm coding, and I could possibly become a manager if I wanted. I don't want to be a manager, but other people like being managers. And you could be one of those annoying programmers who like flips out his collar and like goes to Starbucks and like types loudly and has a weird startup with at the end. You could do that. Nobody can stop you. So Linux is great because it opens all those doors that weren't open before. And those doors are free, and that's pretty cool. So, let's see what else we got. Oh yeah, so I'm gonna go through a quick history of Linux. I have no idea how long this video has been going already, but I am sorry. I can guarantee you there's not many slides left. And then after that, I'm going to go quick over where you can download this stuff, and then we will go on to the next video. Alright, so a really quick history of Linux. So, Linux, the operating system that I keep talking about, before Linux, there was Unix. So we're going to go over a very brief Unix history. Unix was a closed source OS. When I talk about closed source, think Windows, how you can't see the inner codes of Windows. A lot of it is hidden from you, and in most cases, closed source also means a company owns it, so if you try to play with it, you can get in trouble. So it's a closed source OS developed in 1969. The US was going just so much innovation at that time. That's why we went to the moon at that time as well. Like, I only realized that recently. I was just like, wait a second. We went to the moon and we developed Unix? Look at us, US, go! That's so neat. We don't do that as much anymore. But you know what? We did at one point, and that's neat. So it was down in a place called Bell Labs. If you want to learn more about that, you should totally look up what is a monopoly. And you will quickly realize why you don't hear about Bell Labs anymore. But doesn't matter, because it was still really sweet. Bell Labs was in New Jersey. It was developed by a couple fellows named Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie. Dennis Ritchie, unfortunately, has passed away. He passed away, funny enough, during my Unix Linux Fundamentals class. We were in the middle of the class, and I had a teacher that gave us pop quizzes constantly that just asked us, like, who developed Unix? And you would have to put in Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie. And he did this for several classes, and then the day that Dennis Ritchie died, everyone put the late Dennis Ritchie, and he opened with a joke that class, and he was just like, I noticed a lot of you wrote the late Dennis Ritchie, but I don't quite remember him being late to anything. And it was one of those like sort of somber jokes of like, oh god, he's dead. Um, but funny, Ken Thompson is still alive, and he's technically on the books at Google, so that's kind of cool. After it was developed in Bell Labs, it was adopted by Berkeley. You know Berkeley because Berkeley's in California. You'll notice that like after that like brief moment in New Jersey, everything just happens in California. It's hilarious. So it was adopted by Berkeley, who cloned Unix. They created BSD. We're not going to talk about BSD that much, but you should totally look up BSD. They have a cute, adorable little devil as their mascot. He's a beastie. Mascot. Beastie. BSD beastie. Demon thing. Okay, that's not important. It's just more, it's more important that they created a open source version of Unix because BSD was open source. So with that, then the GNU operating system was created. It is a full suite of utilities for operating computers written in C. It was missing a kernel, the missing piece of their free OS. So, one of the things that is pretty interesting is when I talk about the full suite of utilities for operating computers, the kernel is the thing that's kind of still important. The kernel, the kernel is the lowest part that most people will ever interact with the hardware on. So what happens is you have the kernel, and then there's the hardware, and then there are drivers written in between the kernel and the hardware, and they're written in like assembly language, but like C is considered a quote unquote high level language, and that is what all of that's written in. The actual tools that you play with, like when you start running commands and stuff like that, those are all GNU. You're not really going to play with the kernel too much. Kernel is for people who are just heavily invested in just making shit go. And that is wonderful, but you as newbies, assuming that you're a newbie watching this class, not gonna mess with it very much. Not right now, anyway. In time, yes, totally. But right now, no, not so much. All you need to know is it's a low-level part of Linux, and without it, we would be sad. So the next thing is now we're actually going to talk about Linux a little bit. So in 1991, Linus Torvalds released the first free Unix-like kernel. There's actually, you can look up the original chats online where he was talking about, there was this thing called Minix, and he was just like, what if I rewrote Minix in C? And people were like, oh, I could see that. And he's just like, yeah, I think I'm gonna do this, and then it ends up being like one of the biggest OSs in the world. It's funny, it was just this Finnish dude messing around, and he came up with some really neat stuff that gave us amazing things like Google and YouTube. And other really awesome things. In one of the interviews, he talks about one of the things that motivated him to start programming was as a kid, his parents wouldn't buy him computer games, and so he would write his own computer games. So that's the kind of like really sort of lame nerd he was, but it is so freaking inspiring. I met this guy once. He is so scary, but he put his arm around me, and it was a positive experience. Linux is informally adopted as GNU Linux. So they combine the two things, and technically every time you're using Linux, you're using GNU Linux, or GNU. GNU is another way it's pronounced. Most people never say GNU Linux or GNU Linux. They generally just say Linux. It's pretty much always assumed that you're using those because those have just sort of become the standard. You could nerd out and do your own thing. That's not necessary, but you could. So that's basically the base history we're going to go over. As we go on, we'll definitely talk about little things that are left over from the past, but this gives you sort of, this is how it all began. And now we have Google and YouTube and Facebook. That's pretty cool, right? But this is a foundation. There's so much more you can go and read about this. You can go and learn how to code in C tomorrow, but as a newbie, this will do. So, Linux today. So Linus Torvalds is still the maintainer for the Linux kernel and approves all merges. He is prolific for his bravado and vulgarity. Like, very much so. That is a real photo of him there. He's currently flipping off NVIDIA because NVIDIA is not working with him on the whole getting drivers to work and not breaking things for users. And it's making him look bad, and it's angering him, and so he flips off the camera because Linus is his own boss and he gives no fucks. So he's funny, a bit intense for some, but that is our benevolent dictator. So this is the guy you have to talk to if you want your code added to the Linux kernel. He also has a small team of kernel maintainers that help process the merge requests. If you're like, there's still a chance that he will do merges anyway, but for the most part, you're gonna end up with like one of like 6-7 people that he has on his team that will merge things in. I don't know if that number is exactly right, but those are the amount of people that I saw go to LinuxCon and talk about the kernel. And like, one of them was a girl at one point, and then she left because Linus was kind of mean. But anyway, so if you want, you can go work on Linux. Nothing stops you from doing that tomorrow if you wanted. They don't require college or money or anything. You can just go contribute to that. And then anytime you contribute directly to the Linux kernel, which, oh yeah, by the way, you need to know C. Anytime you do that, though, you're affecting essentially the whole internet, and that's pretty cool. They won't happen overnight, but in time, when they all update to the latest kernel, they will see that you have some really tiny commit in there somewhere, and it's totally nerd cred. So maybe that's something you want to work up to. Maybe it's not. But the point is that anybody can eventually get to the point where they too can have their own OS or their own distro. So that leads me into distributions. This is a great time to talk about it. So there are many distributions. When I talk about a distribution, I'm talking about people that have forked Linux in some way. So they looked at the base, like GNU Linux, and they were like, yeah, it's great, but and they modified it to their needs. In some cases, they did things like they set up Hannah Montana Linux, which is really just a more Hannah Montana-fied Linux. Not too much is different. Most of it is just the brand name is there everywhere. Anytime you need Hannah Montana Linux, it's there. You can just go download it. It's free. Someone put that up there. There's also Puppy Linux. And there are other adorable Linuxes of just people desperately trying to get children into this. And I understand, but the people doing this are not fantastic with children. They're just not. Other great attempts and things that you've actually heard of are Android. Android is that's Linux on the back end. If you look in there, the core directories are going to be directories that you will see in Linux. When I talk about directory, I'm talking about a folder. But there will be all sorts of other Linuxes out there that you're probably not familiar with. But the main ones that you should know about are Android, Red Hat, Debian, and as a user, probably Ubuntu. OpenSUSE, I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce that. I've seen both, I've heard both. I don't know that it matters because most people are chatting online and never actually chatting in person, so I don't think it matters. Yeah, those are going to be the main distributions that you see. You tomorrow could make your own distribution. No one can stop you, provided that you forked a totally legal licensed version that was allowed to do that. But yeah, nothing stops you from making your own distribution or using whatever distribution you want. In our case, though, we're going to freaking focus on things that are Red Hat based. I work with Red Hat Enterprise Linux for a living, and I have worked with CentOS for a living. I've also worked with Ubuntu for a living, but I know Red Hat based OS is the best. Generally, there will be a main company that maintains something, so in this case, Red Hat, and then there's a community enterprise edition of some sort, CentOS. I have worked with both because I've worked for companies that are like, shh, we don't need no freaking support. And those are the people that use the community edition. And then I've worked with people where they're like, we don't trust our engineers. And those are the people that have the supported Linux that costs money. And you're not paying for Linux so much as you are paying to call somebody to say, I am bad at Linux, please help. And they will help, but comes at a price. So when I talk about Linux, and when you start setting things up, if you go to set up your own AWS instance, or somebody's just like, what Linux should I install? The answer is something Red Hat-y. So a thing that would be available on your Raspberry Pi would be Pydora. If you have your freaking Blender, maybe you can install Fedora. Fedora and CentOS are both community-free distributions that are very similar to the thing that we are going to be using. Most of everything I do is going to be CentOS. Now and again, I will mention Debian or Ubuntu-based commands. We're not going to do any mobile development here, but that's pretty much it. Is that it? Yes, yes. Okay. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them at the bottom. Now I'm just going to do a quick where to find the things that you should download. So first things first, here is Putty. Go to putty.org. You want to just download this first link right here, www.putty.org. That's where you go. Anything else you download, I cannot verify, and I really hope you don't get a virus because of me. I would feel terrible. So again, www.putty.org. iTerm2 for your Mac. You want to go to www.iterm2.com. If you do not see this little lock right here, don't download it. In fact, most places you're at, if you don't see this little lock right here, I just stay off the website. It's maybe not safe. I don't trust it. Just don't. Just don't. But iTerm2 free. Putty also free. The other thing is if you're on Windows and you're on a somewhat modern version of Windows, then you can have Commander. Commander's pretty sweet. Commander allows you to have somewhat of a more iTerm-like interface, as well as still allowing you to have the same Windows commands you know and love and cherish. You want to go to cmder.net, and then right here just download the full. It's kind of large, still technically under a gig, but totally worth it. After that, I would go ahead and make sure that it can be run. I would throw it on your desktop. If you're going to be watching these, you're probably going to need it all the time. So that's basically it there. The final thing is I mentioned my website. So that's howtonix.info. I'm referring to Unix and Linux. When I say Nix, I mean things that are applicable to both. This is kind of like the old version of the website, but the domain remains the same. It may eventually redirect to maybe another domain. I bought some other random domains like linux.network because it was like, oh, there's a .network TLD. Sign me up. I'll spend $14 on that. And so I did. And so the other slide decks from previous classes I've taught are on here. You may or may not find them useful. Probably not, but you know, they're here. I am eventually going to slowly start updating these, and I'm slowly going to start updating things like the homework that once was on here, and the slide deck. So anytime that I show you a slide deck, you can always come back and follow up with it here. The other thing is the About section will have a little link to how to contact me if you need to contact me directly for some reason. This class meets on Google Hangouts every other Wednesday at 6:30 PST. That's not entirely accurate anymore. I should probably update that. It's class meets whenever Jesse kind of feels like it. You know. Then there's also the resources. So the resources, I kind of gave you a little bit on how to do things with Putty and how to do things with Commander and how to do things with Terminal and how to do things with iTerm and how to do things with Unix, Linux, sort of terminal consoles. There's going to be plenty more that gets put up here. All of this I sort of wrote myself and I'm continuing to write myself, so it'll kind of take some time. But if you have any questions, go ahead and let me know. I can't imagine anybody's watching this, but I'm going to put it up anyway. Yay! Alright, I will talk to you next time.